Okay, good evening. Welcome to this last class on eschatology. You're probably not going to be able to use the word for a while. As some of you know, Joan McConnell passed away this last week, so I'd like to dedicate this class to her memory. Okay, so tonight we conclude our series on eschatology by looking at both Hindu and Buddhist traditions. Both of these religions belong to what we call the Indic family of religions, which differs from the Abrahamic family, and that while the latter are linear in perspective, that's the Abrahamic, the Indic are cyclical. So life and time is represented by a circle rather than a line. Meaning that in Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, creation is depicted as having a beginning, so let's say that's the left point on the line, a middle, and an end, which would be the right point on the line. So it's a straight line. While in Hinduism and Buddhism, it is best represented by a circle whose beginning and end points converge. Where's the beginning of the circle? Where's the end of the circle? The beginning and end point are the same. So that's the big distinction. Linear, it's at one end of the line, the other end cyclical, beginning and end are actually at the same time. That's why it's sometimes even said, no birth, no death, just transformation. In any case, so let us begin with Hinduism. So the cyclical notion of existence is sometimes represented by this god, Harihara, who is simultaneously both dissolves and regenerates the universe at the same time. Notice he's divided in half. Half is his creative power, half is his destructive power. But they're both part of the same deity. In fact, it's usually said that one side represents Vishnu, the god of creation, the other side, the god Shiva, the god of destruction. So, the moment of creation and destruction are one and the same, just as they are on the circle. So what does that mean? It means when anything is created, something is destroyed. And when anything is destroyed, something is created. They don't stand as separate realities. They're combined. And you can think anything in life is sort of that way. Something begins at the destruction of something else, and the destruction is the same as the beginning of something else. So it's that notion, which is hard for us to grasp because we're so used to the linear view of things. That's how we view time. And even, this is sometimes where we get in trouble talking with physicists about the Big Bang, because we think of the Big Bang as a point in time. It's not a point in time. There was no time. I discussed this with Jerry Clifford. He said, we ask those questions based on the fact that that's our view of time, that it begins and somehow it ends. Well, the cyclical view challenges that. Like I said, where on the circle is any point, the same point is the beginning of the end of that part of the circle. Okay. And like I said, Vishnu and Shiva represent those two parts. So now this is where it gets also very interesting, at least to me. In Hinduism, time is thus cyclic and consists of a series of different cycles. Can you read those? I'll go over them, but can you see them on this? Fortunately, our screen isn't very big. If you look at the top, the totality of all time is known as the life of Brahman. It is 300 trillion years. Hindus had a very keen notion of the size of both the universe and of the length of time. They were calculating that this entire major cycle of a life of Brahman is 311 trillion years. That is divided into the next layer, which are called kalpas. Each kalpa lasts 4.32 billion years, and then is followed by a dissolution of an equal length. So it's about 8 billion years. So there's a life and then a dissolution. They're both 4 billion years long. That's in a kalpa, which together make up one full day and night of Brahman. Each kalpa is then divided into 14 manvantaras. Do you see the next level? Each lasting 306,720 billion years. Each of these 14 periods is divided into what are known as Yuga cycles, each cycle over 4 billion years. Or 4 million years, excuse me. And that's where we're going to deal with, because that's where recent time is in the Yugas. But the total picture is massive. It's often told in a certain myth where Vishnu is lying on a cosmic ocean and he's asleep. Out of his belly button comes a lotus. It's in a belly button. What do you think of a belly button? That's the connection, right, of new life. Out of his belly button comes the deity Brahma, who then creates a day of Brahma, which lasts 4.32 billion years. Then Brahma goes back into the lotus goes back into the belly button, Vishnu sleeps for another 4.32 billion years. And this keeps fluctuating. There's actually no beginning to the universe from Hindu and Buddhist. It's always been. Because there's no beginning to a circle. There's a beginning to a line. So there's actually no beginning as we understand it. It's just we have certain experiences that we then have time references to. Yeah, Chris?
Why do you think, humans that lived in Europe or the United States and have a Christian eschatology looked at time in such a short span, say at one point
6,000, yeah, 6,000 years.
And this that looked at it in trillions. They're both humans looking at the universe. Why so different in one culture than
Well, I think what happened is it was based on biblical references to genealogies. So-and-so begets so-and-so begets so, and goes back to Adam. And it was really talking about, they're trying to come to terms with the beginning of what we would call human history, which may be several thousand years, or maybe a million years, depending on archaeological finds. Not so much the universe as a whole. Okay. The two got tied in together. Although if you read in Genesis, human beings aren't created at the beginning. They come much later, but it got tied in with that. And then when you tried to trace it back through the genealogies, well, you only got 6,000 years. So yeah, this is a little longer than 6,000 years. It's actually much older than current Western notions of the universe are. So in any case, it's what I wanted to get across is this sense of the size of the universe that was understood, and time as being massive. And when you think of that, our lives are very small parts of a very, very big ball game. And this will later tie in with reincarnation. You've had millions of lives, by definition. People think, that's a lot. Well, what are these telescopes telling us how many galaxies there are? Billions. Billions of galaxies. And galaxies have millions and millions of stars. Yeah.
So these odd numbers are in, obviously, our counting system. I mean, they could have been in Roman numbers. How did they, did they get these odd numbers from translating?
They took them from text, but they also were pretty good astronomers. And they're very high mathematicians. Some of the greatest, even today, world's mathematicians have come out of India. I don't know how they got the exact numbers, but as we can see, they were extremely large. So I'm going to focus on the bottom four, because they're the most important in terms of eschatology. And these are called the 4 Yugas. They're the Satya Yuga, the Treta Yuga, the Dwapara Yuga, and the Kali Yuga. So, let's look at these each. Satya Yuga. Sat means truth. Truth of being. So the Satya Yuga is the first and best of the 4 Yugas in the Yuga cycle. It's supposed to last 1,728,000 years. It's known as the Age of Truth, when humanity is governed by the gods, and every manifestation or work is close to purest ideal. Intrinsic goodness rules the universe during the Satya Yuga, and it's sometimes referred to as the golden age of man. The god Dharma, depicted in the form of a bull, you can see on the right, symbolically stands for morality and is on 4 legs. So if something's on 4 legs, what is it? It's very solid. So that's the symbol of the Satya Yuga. In Sanskrit, Treta means a collection of 3 things, and is so called because during this Yuga, which again lasts millions of years, there were 3 avatars of Vishnu. That means that 3 times the god Vishnu incarnated himself. And one of the most important is being Rama. Rama, one of the main gods in Hinduism, as an incarnation of Vishnu, just like Jesus would be seen to be an incarnation of God. So the Hindus have that concept as well. So it's during the Treta Yuga that Vishnu incarnates himself 3 times. It's also during this time that a social order is created, which is essentially the caste system, or the 4 Varna system, of the Brahmins, who are the intellectuals, the Kshatriyas, who are the administrators and warriors, the Vaishyas, who are the merchants, and the Shudras, who are the workers. And it's often described as the Silver Age, and the Dharma bull stands on 3 legs. And it's often said the very need to create a social structure shows that you're already 1 level down from the original Satya Yuga. When you have to create law, what does that mean? People are not intrinsically acting the right way. So law has to be created. So that's the Dwapara Yuga is called the Bronze Age. There's a decline in morality and spiritual practices. The people drifted further and further from the divine. They became more competitive, jealous, deceitful, pleasure-seeking. And the standard of living started to decline. These years included the great battle, the Mahabharata, which is somewhat similar to the Iliad in Indian tradition. What does it show you by the very fact that you're having great battles? Things are coming apart. Things are coming apart. We also have during this time the incarnation of Krishna. So Vishnu incarnates himself in this period as Krishna. And Krishna is involved in that battle in which he stands for righteousness over evil. The Dwapara period ends with Krishna's death. And then we enter the Kali Yuga. Kali means black. The dark Yuga. It's the worst of the 4 Yugas. It is known as the age of darkness, the age of vice and misery, the age of quarrel and hypocrisy. In Kali Yuga, there's continual warfare between power-hungry kings and princes.
Is that where we are now?
We are there now, if you haven't guessed. Plague, famine, pestilence, natural calamities appear. Here you can see comparisons again with the other eschatologies, right? The end of times, things don't look good. Not only sociologically, politically, but naturally. Nature is out of whack as well. Morality is at its lowest and is depicted as the bull of Dharma standing on one leg. It's hard for a bull to stand on one leg. There are false religions. Many profess false knowledge, by which means to earn their livelihood. In this text, known as the Srimad Bhagavatam, it's a classic Hindu text, there's a chapter on the symptoms of the Kali Yuga, in which we find the following passage. Shukdev Goswami said, "Then, O king, religion, truthfulness, cleanliness, tolerance, mercy, and memory will all diminish day by day because of the powerful influence of the age of Kali. In Kali Yuga, wealth alone will be considered the sign of a man's good birth. Proper behavior and fine qualities and law and justice will be applied only based on those who have power. Men and women will live together merely because of superficial attraction, and success in business will depend on deceit. Womanliness and manliness will be judged according to one's expertise in sex. A man will be known as a Brahmin, that's just because he's wearing the sacred thread. A person's spiritual position will be ascertained merely according to external symbols. And on that same basis, people will change from one spiritual order to the next. A person's propriety will be seriously questioned if he does not earn a good living. And one who is very clever at juggling words will be considered a learned scholar." Yeah, you wouldn't be surprised to hear that this is, according to traditional Hindu thought, we're in the middle, if not the last part of the Kali Yuga. But at the end of the Kali Yuga, another avatar will appear. Remember, an avatar is an incarnation of Vishnu. Vishnu always comes into the world to right things, to restore righteousness. And he will be known as Kalki, the Kalki avatar. He will be the 10th such avatar. So there have been, in most tradition, there's several accounts of how many avatars there have been, but the most popular is the Das avatar. There have been 10 major avatars of Vishnu in these Yuga cycles. He is described, he will be a Brahmin warrior. He appears for the first time in the great epic, the Mahabharata. According to the Indic scholar from Chicago and Harvard, Wendy Doniger, Kalki mythology begins somewhere around 1700 CE. So about 1500 to 1700 CE, the idea of Kalki returning was starting to take place. In an 18th century text, the Kalki Purana, We learn that Kalki will be born in a village called Shambhala in northern India on the 13th day during the 4th night of the waxing moon. It gets very detailed. At a very young age, he'll be taught the Holy Scriptures as well as military tactics. He will worship Shiva, who will be pleased with his devotion, and provide him in return with a divine white horse named Devadatta. A powerful sword, can you see that? Whose hand is bedeckled with jewels, and a parrot. You see the parrot up at the top? There's a little bird right up at the top. Where is it? No? Yep. Should be up at the top. Can you see him? Walk up close, Chris. I think it's a little green parrot right at the top. Anyway, there is a parrot, whether you can see it or not. And this parrot is an all-knowing bird. Knows all the past, all the present, and all the future. So there's this omnipotent bird, which again is one of his qualities. When he is older, he will fight an evil army and defeat it. He will then return to Shambhala and inaugurate a new Yuga after his victory, following which he will go to Vishnu's heavenly realm and the cycle will start again.
Isn't the specificity of it a little dangerous, kind of like what he said Jesus?
Yeah. Once you start getting specific, and there are those in the Hindu tradition who have claimed to be the Kalki avatar. Yeah, this sort of thing happens. And then that whole cycle will repeat itself. We find reference in the Bhagavad Gita when it says, whenever there is a decay of righteousness and a rise of unrighteousness, then I myself am manifest. That's Vishnu. And he will manifest himself as the avatar Kalki. There are two other sources. It became quite popular. The great Professor A.L. Basham, who I studied under in Australia, said that while traditional Orthodox Hinduism sort of shies away from this, Kalki avatar is very popular. It's a popular idea, just as we find in Christianity, the second coming is a popular idea, not so much practiced in the traditional denominations it's referred to, but same here. And we have these numerous books called Puranas that describe it. So the Agni Purana describes Kalki as having Vishnu as his priest and destroying the evil ones. He will reestablish moral law and people will return to the path of righteousness in all stages of life. And in the Bhagavata Purana tells of God's hailing Vishnu and invoking his Kalki avatar, when almost all the people in this world will be barbarians, and when the wicked kings will oppress the righteous right and left, thou wilt incarnate thyself again as Kalki and redress all the grievances. Bow down to Kalki. Bow down to the Kalki form. So this is that eschatological hope that you find in all of these traditions. You look around and things don't always seem to be as good as they could be. And at times they can get quite horrendous. Wars, pestilence, all the evils that we think of. These are the times when this notion comes to the surface religiously. There must be an answer to this. And that answer will usually be in the future, sometimes in the far future, sometimes in the near future. But it gives people hope. It gives people hope that, if you want to use, I guess, these terms, evil doesn't have the last say. That's sort of the hope. Interestingly, this shows how ideas spread. Kalki avatar also appears in some of the Sikh texts, S-I-K-H, the Sikh religion, which didn't appear till the 16th century. It's a syncretic religion that tried to bring Hinduism and Islam together. And it has references to the Kalki avatar. I find that very interesting. It shows how various traditions can borrow from one another. Okay, so that's Hindu eschatology. Stop at this point. Any major questions before we move on to Buddhist eschatology? I think you can see some similarities, right, between Abrahamic and Hindic eschatologies. The time reference is different, cyclical versus linear is different, but the idea that things get bad and will get better is a common aspect of all eschatologies. Okay, let's turn to Buddhist eschatology. So like many facets of modern Buddhist practices and belief, Buddhist eschatology tended to develop during its Chinese experience, when it developed in China. Buddhism was first introduced into China from India during the Han Dynasty, which was 206 BCE to 220 CE. So Buddhism originated around 600, so it took about 400 years for Buddhism to enter into China from India. And it was promoted by the emperors of the Tang Dynasty, which are again another 400 years later, 618 to 907. So this is when Buddhism really became strong in China. There was a translation of a large body of Buddhist scriptures into Chinese. What the Chinese emperors did was they sent Buddhist monks back down into India to get copies of these scriptures and bring them back and translate them. So when you're going from China to India, there were no trains, there were no cars, you walked. And there's a barrier there. So anyway, and there are tremendous stories about these monks who traveled down into the northern plains of India to get these scriptures, bring them back and have them translated. Now, we're going to start Chinese religion next week, and we will see during the next 4 weeks that Taoism and Confucianism were the two oldest religious traditions. So that when Buddhism comes into China, it also is impacted by these traditions. And one of the Taoist traditions was an apocalyptic tradition, or an eschatological tradition, that spoke of the end of time, the end of things. So that probably got incorporated into Buddhism in China. From China, Buddhism eventually spread to Korea, to Japan, to Vietnam from the north. From the south, it came up through Southeast Asia. So we find these ideas spreading, and as they spread, drawing in part of the original cultures that are present. So just quickly, I should have mentioned this at the beginning. My surgeries are scheduled for the 22nd and 29th of this month. 22nd, right cataract, 29th, right retina. That means I'll be able to do the next 3 classes on China. The last one I might have to skip a week, I think, because it'll be only a week after the retina surgery, and I'll probably have, but just to bring that in mind. So anyway, just quickly Taoism, because Taoism had this an apocalyptic side to it, but essentially Taoism is a diverse tradition in China. Taoism means living in harmony with the Tao, and the Tao means the way, the path. It's generally understood as being impersonal. It's not a being, it's an impersonal ground whose nature is continual transformation into a variety of different forms, while maintaining its essential unity. And this is how the eschatological gets tied in, because as change takes place, things often don't get better. If you want a reference to how that unity works, the image is usually that of a river whose primary element is water, and that's constant, but whose course is constantly changing. So there's the constant that is the water, but its course is constantly changing. And that's the Tao. And Tao is, and I'll go into this in much greater detail when we do Chinese religion. So there was this figure, I couldn't find an image of him, named Li Hong, who was a savior figure in the Taoist tradition, who spoke of the end of the world cycle. This likely got incorporated into Chinese Buddhism, which then later was spread from China to Korea to Japan, etc. That's how religious ideas spread. They usually by trade. Trade is the big common denominator. Trade, but so this is the main idea. So there are two major components in Buddhist eschatology. Whoops. I got to close something here. I can't even read that. It's a blue thing on my screen which won't let me advance this. Can you see what this is, Mike? Is Mike sleeping? I know. There's something on my screen that won't allow me to move. Your battery is running low. Oh, okay. How do I close that? Just touch it? Okay. All right. We're not going to get any more images. Okay. I'll keep going, and if we can get the images later, maybe. Okay. The first component is known as Maitreya Buddha. Maitreya Buddha. He's regarded as the future Buddha. At the fifth and final Buddha of the current Kalpa. So Buddhism has took in Indian Kalpas. Remember, a Kalpa is a large period of time, billions of years. So in Buddhism, we find this again, this notion of these Kalpas. The fifth and final Buddha will be Maitreya. He will reestablish the Dharma. What is the Dharma? No single word is a very good translation, at least in English, but it's commonly understood as referring to behaviors relating to virtue, to religiosity, to moral duty. When you're following the Dharma, you're following your moral duty. And the Maitreya Buddha will return to reestablish this. Now, if he has to return to reestablish this, what is it saying? It's declined. So again, Buddhism has this notion of good periods when the Buddhas appear, then gradually over time, things decline, and there will be requirement for another Buddha. And so in Buddhist eschatology, we have reference to this Maitreya Buddha. Maitreya is derived from the Sanskrit word meaning friendship. So the Maitreya Buddha is your friend. And it's mentioned in the Pali Canon. Again, I have an image. The Pali Canon is the original Sanskritic, well, they were in Pali, but then translated into Sanskrit, Buddhist texts. These were the original texts. They didn't take or appear until 29 BCE. When did Gautama Buddha, 6th century? What's going on for 400 years? There are texts, but they're not written. They're memorized. They're passed down through memory. We call them oral texts. So for that first 400 years, there are oral texts. And as a result, Buddhist monks and I should say this also about Hindu Brahmins, developed very elaborate forms of memorization. I think it's called mnemonics, how to memorize things. You may have, every once in a while you see on one of these shows somebody who can memorize the phone book or something. That's probably a little bit with their brain, but also there are systems that are developed that can, and if that's what your job is, that's your duty, to memorize these texts. But in any case, we have reference to Maitreya Buddha in the original texts. So there's an awareness, even from the beginning, that although there has been a Buddha, and there's the Pali Canon, those are the original texts, which were oral to begin with, later translated later written in Pali, then translated into Sanskrit, taken to China, translated into China, taken to Korea, translated into Korean, taken to Japan, translated into Japanese. So you see, and when you get translations, you're always going to get problematic issues. Okay, so I want to get to this. This is called the Chakravarti Sutta. A sutta literally means thread. That's what the word means. And it's a sutta is a basic structure of one of the texts. It's like a chapter. Okay? So a sutta would be one of the chapters of the Pali canons.
Sutta is Sanskrit, is Pali.
Sutra is Sanskrit. Yeah. The Buddhists say sutta, the Hindus say sutra. Yeah.
Is that what Sanskrit looks like?
That's probably Pali. Yeah. Okay, so in nearly all branches of Buddhism, Maitreya came to be viewed as a direct successor of Gautama Buddha. So you'll find him in Mahayana, you'll find him in Hinayana, you'll find him in Japan, you'll find him in Korea, you'll find him in Tibet. A mainstay of Buddhist doctrine and eschatology. And according to most of the suttas, his teachings will be very similar to those of Gautama Buddha, okay? Because he's really the same Buddha, just reappearing. He'll be born to a Brahmin father in Varanasi. Varanasi is the sacred city of Hinduism, where all the ghats are, the burning ghats, I think, when we went to Varanasi, which will be ruled by a king Sangha. His spouse will be Princess Sandamukhi. I think it's quite detailed. Mirroring the life of Shakyamuni Buddha, after his birth of his son, he will leave and to practice asceticism. So he's going to follow the life pattern of the Buddha that we know of. That's the sutta he's in. He will receive enlightenment under this tree, just as the Buddha received enlightenment under a tree. He will return to Varanasi, where the king will give up his throne and become one of his followers. We also find reference in this famous sermon, the Maitreya Varkarana sermon. It's a short text written on a palm leaf in the 10th century CE. It contains a discourse given by the Buddha to his monks regarding the arrival of Maitreya and his final achievement of perfect enlightenment. It claims that Maitreya is a teacher of meditation. It states that God's men will lose their doubts and their torrents of their cravings will be cut off. So when Maitreya teaches, desires will dissolve. There will be free from all misery, and they will cross the ocean of becoming. This is the ocean of becoming. What's the difference between being and becoming? Becoming is always changing. When you're becoming, you're always moving. Being is... So this is known as samsara. It's the ocean of becoming. We're stuck in this ocean of becoming. all the time. When Maitreya comes, men will leave or desire to leave the ocean of becoming and reach nirvana. They will no longer regard anything as their own. They will have no possessions, no gold or silver, no home, no relatives. But they will lead a life based on the oneness of being. Everything is one. Everything is the Buddha nature. Just imagine, I mean, it sounds fairly idealistic, but imagine if you viewed the world that way, how you might act in a different manner. If I look at you and I think, you know, we're really the same thing. We're just different fingers on the same hand. Under his guidance, they will tear the net of their passions, and theirs will be abundance of joy and happiness. They will leave what is sometimes called the nausea of samsara. What's nausea? It's a physical sickness, but mentally nausea is that sense of alienation, detachment, attachment, where you just... Jean-Paul Sartre wrote a famous novel called Nausea, where he would look at a tree and he just felt alienated from it. All of life, he just seemed strange. Well, that's samsara. That's what it does, according to Buddhism. So men will be freed from this. So Maitreya is depicted as existing before he arrives in what is known as the Tusita heaven. So it's another level of reality. That's where all the Buddhas have presided before they become physical Buddhists. Do you see and there's no doubt in my mind that this sort of Buddhist thought has been impacted by Hindu thought of incarnations and avatars. You know, that there are levels of being and that the divine descends eventually into the realm of samsara. He's often portrayed standing, the standing Maitreya, with his feet on the ground solid. He's sometimes portrayed sitting. Oh, did I do them opposite? Did I get them backwards? Oh, that... Okay, seated and standing. And then there's one you may have seen. In China, he's known as Putai, or the laughing Buddha. Usually with a big belly. This is if you go into shops to buy images of the Buddha, you'll often find this. He's fat, jolly, portrayed, emerging from 10th century folklore.
Is that actually in China? That rock
carving? It's rock carving.
Wow.
The second eschatological theme in Buddhism is called the Sermon of the Seven Sons. Here there is no mention of Maitreya, only the Buddha's description of the ultimate fate of the world in an apocalypse that will be characterized by the appearance of 7 different sons over time. Each S-U-N, sons, like in the sun. Each causing progressive ruin until the earth is destroyed. The sutra or sutta emphasizes that all things are impermanent. All aspects of existence are unstable and non-eternal. That's not difficult to prove. Does anything last forever? No. Some might say atoms, but then we know even atoms can... So things are always changing. Now we can't live that way practically. Practically we accept that things are stable. You accept that the chair you're sitting in is stable and isn't impermanent. But In reality, over time, we know that chair is just as impermanent as anything else. It will eventually come apart. So this is an eschatology. So it's realizing that in the end, all things that we think are permanent will dissolve. And that's part of the eschatology. And it'll take place in 7 steps. In this time, beings will become so weary and disgusted with the phenomenal world that they will seek emancipation with great urgency. Like I said, it's that nausea of samsara. How long does it take you to say, okay, let me get off. Let me get off. And not necessarily with despair in heart, but as you get older, I think it's true, the realization that the things you think bring you whatever, eventually those change. And then you end up like in the Buddhist 4 visions, the man lying on his deathbed, and what is left? Maybe some memories if you're lucky. And if not that, the corpse. Now in Buddhism, the idea that that's all samsara. Underneath that is your Buddha nature. That always has been, always will be. It's the circle. You're never really born, you never really die. Only manifestations appear. And you're one of those your body, your mind, your brain, those are just one of those manifestations. But they will disappear. What won't disappear is the underlying, I guess in Christianity you'd call it the Holy Spirit or the Christ nature, that which is permanent, but it's not permanent in any samsaric sense. When we try and understand things permanently in samsaric sense, we get confused. All we think of is extra time. More. Okay? So, in this time things become weary, and this is how the text reads. There will come a season, O monks, when after hundreds of thousands of years, rains will cease. All seedling, all vegetation, all plants, grasses, and trees will dry up and cease to be. That's not unlikely scientifically, by the way, is it? Eventually, this planet will dry out. Now, it might be a long time from now, but we're already starting to experience what they call climate change and the effects that it's having. There comes another season after a great lapse of time when a second sun will appear. Now all brooks, ponds will dry up, vanish, and cease to be. The text goes on to describe the progressive destruction of each sun. The third sun will dry up the Ganges. A fourth will cause lakes to evaporate. A fifth will dry up the ocean. After a vast period of time, a sixth sun will appear, and it will bake the earth, even as a pot is baked by a potter. All the mountains will reek and send up clouds of smoke. After another great interval of time, a seventh sun will appear, and the earth will blaze with fire until it becomes one mass of flame. The end of that cycle. Start over. Start over. The Buddha speaks these words. Thus, monks, all things will perish and exist no more except those who have seen the path. Meaning those who have experienced the underlying unity of the Buddha nature, which is not bothered by time, is not bothered by space. It is beyond both, and it is at your core. That's the Buddhist message. We tend to think of ourselves as individuals in our samsaric world, and we spend most of our energy trying to gain things in this samsaric world. I think I told you this before, this is the great American story. you try and find the best possible preschool for your children. Then you try and find the best possible elementary school. Then the best possible secondary school. Then the best possible university. Then the best possible job. Then the best possible retirement system. Then the best possible old people's home. Then the best possible mortuary. In other words, everything is always looked at in terms of what's the best from it, and it's underneath is what's the best. That which is transcendent of all these things. And in Buddhism, the way you try and get there is through deep meditation, deep living in the moment, recognizing that it's always now. It's always now, no matter what the clock says, and trying to get to that essential unity. Okay, that ends our eschatological series. Next week, I'm going to start with China, and we'll start with Confucianism, which often people don't think of as a religion per se, but it has many of the components of religious thought and is one of the most powerful cultural influences in Chinese history, even today, and is on a big comeback, by the way. It's on a big comeback. Okay, any thoughts about anything that you've seen over the last 4 weeks? Okay, go home and see if you can spell eschatological. Okay, see you next week.